you so much for joining us today. We are here with some wonderful background music in Cali. So thank you for bearing with us. And just let us know if you can hear us a little bit. So my name is Laura Cauer Garcia. I'm the program manager for Civic Space for INCLO, the International Network of Civil Liberties Organizations, a network of 15 national human rights groups. And we are here today for this event in De Justicia's wonderful stand to talk about the intersection of civic space and climate action. So I'm joined with 4 colleagues from around the world, and we're going to talk about the importance of defending and expanding civic space to protect climate action. And so without ado, I'll present each one of our speakers. They will do an initial presentation, and then we'll have plenty of time for a discussion and for your questions. All right. So in first place, I would like to introduce my colleague Snigdha Tiwari from the Human Rights Law Network from India. Snigdha is a practicing lawyer in India and a human rights and climate activist. We've been learning a lot from her and her experience in different COPs. And she has been working on climate justice, human rights, and conservation as a lawyer since 2018. So Snigdha, I'll turn it to you first.
Thank you so much for the introduction. And I'm so happy that the music stops. I am sometimes conscious that I speak quite low. So see, the topic that is there for the discussion today is very crucial for the democracies we live in, particularly for the democracies of the global south. Why I say so? Because, we are seeing this trend all across the world that the democracies, particularly with the right, I'm not saying, we're totally against them, but particularly with the right or authoritarian sort of a government, are decreasing the space for protest rights, are decreasing the civic space, not just for protest rights, but in many other forms. So today, when I speak to you, I will categorize it, largely in 3 spheres. One, the space for activists to have the protest. Second, the spaces for civil society organizations. And third, civic space with regard to access to information. So if I go more into, how the space has diminished or is shifting for particularly activists of the global south and even in the global north, where we have authoritarian government, we are finding ourselves in a places where, the protest spaces where we can hold demonstrations, actions are getting limited to, a space. So earlier, for our democracies, the protest spaces used to be, quite wide. You can start a rally from, say, one place and go to another place. But currently, what is happening today, the government with their initiatives of diminishing the right to protest on streets and do demonstrations, what they are doing, they are making silent zones. Like this zone is silent, you can't protest here. Or they are designating spaces which are way outside where the public comes, so that you don't have interaction with public at large and you don't do awareness through your demonstration and you do your protest there. So this is a very problematic aspect of, diminishing civic space. From here, I want to share with you about the 2 recent events which happened in India. One is with the global movement. We all have heard about Fridays for Future. It's a very active youth group which is working on the field of climate justice activism, and it is also present inside COP. So when in 2021, Greta Thunberg, who is supposed to be the founder of Fridays for Future, she posted a toolkit, maybe a strategy, a toolkit on her Twitter, for everyone across the world, and for people in India, for the movement at large, that what should be the toolkit for the climate justice movement? What should the strategy be? And for that toolkit tweet, and there were Indian young youth activists from India who worked on those toolkits, who edited those toolkits and shared it further. And just for that, they were first illegally arrested and then they were sent to jail. Can you imagine, just to talk about toolkit for the climate activism, the young activists were sent to jail. And ultimately, they had to get the bail from the court. So there was a huge movement. At that time, it was good because the protest rights spaces in India is shrinking. So we got a support from global community, and everywhere, the Guardian newspaper, the Caravan newspaper, the New York Times, everyone reported on that story but Greta Thunberg was forced to take down her tweets from the Twitter because it was suggested by the lawyers in India, your toolkit can impact their trial in the courts. So she took down her post. So, the attack on civil space was something which is so benign, which is not, anti-national, like the brand the activists for, which is so benign in nature, can have such an imposition on the young activists. So this is one such rally, one such case of climate activism where we saw very diminishing space. Another such example is very recently we organized a rally in India with the young people. And what we found out after that rally, the rally was organized for saving glaciers, because we have treating glaciers, and a national corporation is planning to construct a hydropower project in the glacier. So they wanted to do the blasting exercise. So we organized a rally to, bring awareness and also protest against the national corporation and the government. And what that led, so all the members, all the students who were participant of that rally, the local intelligence unit followed them to their houses, their colleges, and asking them, why did you go for that rally? Who is funding you? Who is talking to you about such events? So the space for young people, they are trying to intimidate them. This is an action before actually criminalizing them. So it is intimidating them so that they don't go for more such climate actions, to say. So I think this is more on the activist front. If I talk about the civil society organizations, which is the second space where I'm seeing diminishing spaces. So what we are seeing in countries like us, that civil society organizations who are working for climate agenda and human rights agenda, the government is heavily after them. They are canceling their permits to receive funding from foreign NGOs and institutes if they are working for climate. If they are directly working with the activists, they are being branded that we are promoting the agenda of foreign agents, and they are coming behind the registration of civil society organizations. So it has become a very critical space because the attack is directly on civil society organizations. For example, we all know Greenpeace, right? Greenpeace is a very big organization working for conservation and climate justice movement. And in the Greenpeace India was banned, their FCRA was cancelled. And there was no financial irregularities on the part of Greenpeace India. Then we would think, no, why was it cancelled? Why did the FCRA, for which they could receive foreign funding, got cancelled? Because it was supposed that they are promoting again anti-national agenda, foreign funding things, going anti-development and working on the Western agenda. So it is very critical. The space for civil society organization is also diminishing a lot. And it is worrisome because civil society organizations provide, a sort of support to the activists, defenders, climate activists on ground. And when they are under attack, so it is a real problem because they are under attack and they are facing various sanctions. Everyone who is active are, they are facing sanctions. Other than that, the spaces where we are seeing a lot of impact is the space where we have access to justice. So, for example, public participation used to be a very, crucial element of any project being that government was carrying with any community or indigenous population or local population. But what we are seeing that they are weakening the legislation with regard to the public participation. Now, currently, India is working on the law. They are suggesting an amendment to the Environmental Protection Act, wherein what they are doing, they are just diminishing. They are saying public participation is not necessary. So now the companies can come in. They will not talk to the populations on ground, and they can, they can get their environmental assessment permits, and they can proceed with the projects, and that will have a very bad impact on also on the human rights of those populations which are there because they were never heard. Other than that, when they provide information, their information is either not in the language of the local language. So first, they don't provide information. When they provide information, it is not in their language. So it is just they're doing it just as a tick box exercise. We did provide information, but the local people are not understanding, and they're protesting against the information being provided in English, or which is not their language. But they're not noting down those points on their minutes when they are finalizing it. And then what is happening after that? Sometimes when they are doing nothing of that sort, we have a very progressive legislation in India by the name Right to Information Act. It was enacted in 2005. So, activists have started filing applications under the Right to Information Act to seek the information from the government. So when they are seeking information, there is a challenge there also. So first they may not, so the time period for giving the information is 30 days. So what they'll do, they will first not give the information. If they will give information, they will give half information, and or they will just not give the information. So then, but the legislation is good, and we are able to appeal the information that they have given. And ultimately, we are finding ourselves at the level of the High Court, where we seek information from the state government, from the High Court. And HRLN currently is doing many such cases where we are seeking information by filing cases, which is very problematic. We should have that information with us at the first instance, because the legislation provide for that. But we are in some ways resulting to do cases and get the information, but on the basis of that information, because the information is very authentic, coming from a very legal channel. So the cases that we are filing on the basis of that application have some authenticity to it, because it is the information of the government. So we have done many cases against the deforestation projects, against the corruption in India, on the basis of the RTI application information we have received. So yeah, this is my primary remark.
Thank you so much, Snigdha. I think this one's a little bit louder, so I'm going to stick to this one. So thank you so much, Snigdha. I feel like with that, you've already highlighted some of the issues that I think we'll probably hear repeated. I think talking about youth is crucial, and the chilling effect that both surveillance online and physical can have for these generations. So already a crucial issue that I think we'll see recurringly. The issue of civil society organizations and how funding is weaponized for them, the branding of them as foreign agents, and what happens, the repercussions if civil society organizations, the impact that has on human rights defenders, right? These are all ecosystems, and when one suffers, we can see the impact there. So there's a number of things that I'll hopefully get to ask you questions about, but I'll turn to our next speaker, Ruth. So we're going to travel a little bit up north, and I am very happy to have Ruth Ehrlich from Liberty, INCLO's UK member. Ruth is the head of policy and campaigns at Liberty, which is a UK-based organization campaigning to protect and defend civil liberties and human rights for everyone in the UK. And Ruth leads advocacy and influencing work on campaigns from protest rights to surveillance to racist policing, all things that, are key to our understanding of civic space and what we're doing here at COP regarding climate and environmental. So Ruth, all to you.
Thank you so much. This is definitely the vibiest panel I've ever been on, so it's a good background noise. So I'm here to talk about the UK context, and I think just from listening to what you were saying, there are just so many parallels that I'm sure we're going to hear from countries across the world, which I think is interesting and terrifying in equal measure. I wanted to talk specifically about the shrinking civic space for environmental protesters in the UK. This comes in the context of increasing hostility and demonization of climate protesters, both in the media and in political rhetoric. And this has inevitably led to a restriction of rights, which we have seen unravel in recent years. To put this in kind of political context, in the past 10 years, we've seen lots of warm words towards tackling climate change and net zero. but we've also seen the issuing of new oil and gas licenses in the North Sea. We've seen threats to reverse a ban on fracking. So, and not to mention rolling back on international aid as well, and rolling back on our international as well as national commitments. But since 2002, when we had some disastrous changes in Prime Minister, we've also seen a real shift in public attitudes towards climate action and net zero in particular. And it has made climate action be seen as against working people. So it's pitting taking action to deal with the domestic and international environment as something that is of the detriment to ordinary people. And this firmly took it into the kind of culture wars space. So climate change and climate justice is now a culture war problem. I want to give a really small example of this, just to illustrate how ingrained it is. But in London, the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, was introducing an emission standard-based charge on vehicles which didn't meet the petrol standards. So it's called ULEZ. And it's been in the pipeline for many, many years. It's not a Labour thing. It's just been always been there, and everyone's kind of been behind it. But this became the real focus of a rising right-wing movement against action on net zero, to the point where the mayor was receiving huge amounts of racist abuse, both online and being sent bullets to his home, really extreme responses to what was quite a small piece of climate action. I won't go into the ins and outs of boring by-elections, but an election win made the then Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, there was the perception that people were so against ULEZ that net zero as a policy was deeply unpopular. So when he won this by-election unexpectedly, he reversed overnight all of the UK's small net zero projects, and suddenly net zero was this kind of demon program and completely vilified in the press. So this feeds into and is fed into by climate denialism of the far right. Obviously contributes to racist and colonialist ideologies of how we participate in the international space as well. So that's the kind of political media rhetoric landscape. In addition to this, what we've seen is huge swathes of legislation that have been built in to target particularly climate protesters. Within 18 months, we had 2 enormous bills, the Police Crime Sentencing and Courts Act and the Public Order Act, which restricted the ways that people can protest. So things like locking on, static protests, harsher sentencing for those offences and more, allowing the police to stop and search someone with no suspicion, a huge swathe of measures. And this has inevitably criminalised protesters in every movement, but particularly in the climate movement. We've seen the kind of impact of this ranging from the kind of like almost nonsensical stories where people have been arrested for having luggage straps on them in case they attach themselves to something. A woman was arrested going to the races because she had nail glue in her bag for her fake nails. And they thought she might use it to lock herself onto something. And then it ranges to the dystopian, where you have young people being sent to prison for 5 years for organising climate protests. So we've seen the kind of very tangible impact of what the rhetoric leads to. And I just wanted to touch on the ways that Liberty has been trying to defend some of this civic space for climate protesters. So Liberty functions in lots of different ways. We have kind of the lobbying side, where we do lots of parliamentary engagement and we work with civil society. And the ways that we've done that with this legislation is to mobilize kind of a coalition of civil society members, make civil society realize that what might affect climate protesters will also affect the disability rights sector, the housing sector, and kind of create that solidarity within civil society. We also do the kind of much more boring lobbying of writing amendments and targeting MPs and lords, which we were able to do quite successfully in the Policing Act. And we had the kind of worst measures taken out of it through that very traditional kind of campaign and lobbying approach. But what we then saw was the government, who were kind of hell-bent on cracking down on these protesters, introduce another piece of legislation straight after, which brought back all the things that Parliament had just rejected. And the way that they did that was via secondary. They redefined the definition of what serious disruption was. So I think any reasonable person would think that serious disruption meant serious disruption, but their new definition was it was anything more than minor, which feels pretty unreasonable even to an unreasonable person. We thought it was unconstitutional the way that the Home Secretary had done this. So our legal team sued her. And we took her to court on the grounds that it was an inappropriate vehicle to bring in something that had already been rejected by the House of Commons and the House of Lords, and that they also hadn't consulted anyone who affected apart from the police. So we had the police's view and no one else. We won that case, which was amazing. But the government instantly appealed it, and then a general election was called. And now the new government has also committed to appealing it. So we'll be back in court in December fighting that case. And then the third thing we're trying to do to target, to deal with this toxic media narrative is to think about the ways that we as civil society can speak about what we do and speak about protest and speak about climate justice in a way that brings the persuadable middle along with us. And I'm happy to talk about this more, but I think there has been tendency in the kind of civil space not to meet people where they are. And it then feeds into, we're not helping the culture wars issue because we're not kind of bringing people along with us. So we commissioned some work with a kind of cross-party think tank and polling agency to do some deliberative research, which meant meeting with people across the UK, understanding their views on protest and its role in democracy, and then on the specifics of how do people feel about Just Stop Oil protesters lying down in a motorway and people throwing soup at a Van Gogh painting and all the things that you kind of get asked about that stand as excuses to clamp down. And what we found was there was overwhelming support for the right to protest, but there were nuanced views on disruption, and there was a real distaste for some actions like the ones I've just mentioned. But there was also a real lack of sympathy with climate protesters specifically. So what people didn't mind people protesting, people didn't mind if people were taking to the streets to protest for health or cost of living or housing, things that people feel really tangibly affect them. When it came to climate justice, they weren't that bothered. And I think that was a big lesson for us at Liberty. And I think from conversations this week for lots of us, but thinking about how we make climate justice something that everyone can relate to every single day, make people realize that it's a joint struggle. And for organizations like Liberty and the Global North, I think there's a particular piece of work there where there feels like such a disconnect between climate justice and its impact and what people are doing every day. So yeah, I'll stop there. But
thank you so much, Ruth. There's so many good things to pick from that, but I think once again, we see echoes of some of the similar issues in the different jurisdictions. The demonization of climate activists and the role that media has is interesting. I think talking and considering the different stakeholders that we want to engage or that we need to consider in that equation feels very crucial, especially when we are dealing with narrative, a competition for narrative or kind of developing that and what, so that we are not kind of left with black and white, sense of things and culture words. So I think that feels like something that we can come back to. And once again, this persuadable middle of like, who are we talking to and where it can move. So I'll leave it with that. And then we're gonna, I'll go to Mary. So Mary Kambo is joining us from Kenya. She's part of the Kenyan Human Rights Commission. And she's a labor rights and corporate accountability expert with over 10 years of experience. She is, and I'll leave it at that since my phone just disappeared where I was going. But Mary.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lau. And thank you everybody for joining us for this conversation. it's a very hard balance to listen to music, but also speak at the same time. But I mean, we're women. 3/4 of the panel is women, and women can really multitask. Yeah, so my name is Mary Kambo. I come from Kenya. I work with Kenya Human Rights Commission, which is a non-governmental organization that was founded more than 30 years ago. KHRC, as we are abbreviated, is actually a foremost human rights organization in Kenya, leading work on civic space, but also many things around democracy and good governance. Talking about civic space for me it's difficult to talk about civic space without mentioning a bit about our political context, because for us, the political context is what gives rise to the situation of civic space as we experience it today. Our political governance model, as was originally designed, was actually very deliberately designed to ensure civic space does not thrive. And I say this because if you look at the model of governance in Kenya and most part of the region, it is to the extent that basically civic space, if the ruling elite is only interested in the interest of itself, you know, ruling elite, corporate elite. And so there's very little interest in civic and, you know, other liberties. And therefore, when we talk about civic space for, you know, climate change, it's for us more than just civic space for climate change. It is broad civic space that has been constricted over the years, deliberately through the models of political governance. And when I say this, I like to look at Kenya within the region of East Africa. It is a forerunner in terms of democracy, in terms of economy. Kenya is looked up to by its peers. Uganda and Tanzania look up to Kenya. So if we're saying that civic space is constricted in Kenya, then you can imagine how much worse it is within the other systems around, within the other parts of the region. Now, going beyond that, I just like to look at the current manifestations of civic space constriction. The first one, obviously, and I relate that to what Ruth has said, the demonization of civil society. When the current regime took over, they actually started by branding civil society as evil society. And the media took that and ran with it. We were branded as evil society because, of course, pushing for democracy, pushing for good governance. And that was not the ticket on which these particular candidates were campaigning on. So, in fact, when media ran with the tag evil society, it was only a matter of time before the regime attacked the media. So the constriction of this space moved from constricting civil society space to media attacks. So I remember, for example, during the swearing in of the current president, he openly attacked a journalist and said, oh, so you're here covering this? We shall revisit, because the media station had been campaigning or had been profiling an opposition candidate. So the attacks moved from civil society, went to media, and we had this kind of attacks also moving to the judiciary. We had the Chief Justice personally coming under attacks, judges coming under attack because of decisions that they had taken. And especially when the government took up actions without public participation, which is a requirement in the Constitution as a national value of governance and a key principle of governance. The government running with key projects without public participation, and the judiciary taking a position. So we saw very open attacks and very blatant disobedience of court orders. So this for us has been the manifestation of civic space constriction. But also, more than that, of course, a lot of trumped up charges against civil society. Recently, we had protests in the country that were led by the youth. And civil society, of course, was supporting in, bailing out those that were detained illegally or arrested without reason. And what happened is that civil society came under heavy attack from the government. So it becomes very hard, even for climate and environmental human rights defenders. For example, this year, because we experienced climate emergencies and events that occasioned a lot of flooding in the country. We had youth who took to the streets to challenge the flooding because of the proportionate and arbitrary decisions that were taken by the government. The government started by evicting and demolishing houses for people who lived within 30 meters close to the rivers, within the riparian land. And yet the same decisions were not taken, or the same measures were not taken for the middle class that have also taken up part of, river or water paths. So when the youth took to the streets, a lot of them were arrested. They were, of course, fighting issues of climate injustice, and especially the response that was arbitrary from the government. The government responded by arresting them arbitrarily. Kenya Human Rights Commission has come to their defense to bail them out, to secure their release. So these are the kind of challenges we are seeing. We have seen it also happen within carbon markets, because Kenya has some of the most prolific carbon markets, and we know what carbon markets are doing. Of course, they come under the guise of conservation of the environment, conservation of wildlife. But we have seen that it comes with huge dispossession of indigenous peoples and local communities. But when communities when human rights defenders, when civil society organizations have challenged the manner in which the carbon markets are governed, the lack of transparency, lack of accountability, the government has unfortunately refused to take up its position and its mandate to protect the people. And instead, it has protected multinational corporations that are dealing with the trade of carbon credits at the expense of local people, at the expense of indigenous communities. Yeah, so I think for now, I'd like to leave it at that, just providing a global overview of how that space looks like for us.
Thank you so much, Mary. That was very insightful. I think it was interesting to hear in this instance, media also being mentioned, but as someone that could bear the brunt of political vilifying. And so once again, seeing that. And once again, when we talk about narratives, when we talk about this vilification, really bringing home that it does have a very tangible impact. We're talking about many years of prisons. We're talking about someone's security being affected. And when actions that government take are not done with accountability, with transparency for a process, those that are most affected are local communities and our indigenous peoples. And that is a group that, we hadn't mentioned yet, but I think is, key to keep at the forefront of these conversations. Once again, youth being at the forefront of this, I think that's one of the wonderful things that make me very hopeful, but I think increases our sense of responsibility, should increase our sense of responsibility of what happens if this generation is imprisoned, or the chilling effect is such that they, are not willing to take that risk in the future. For our fourth speaker, I'm going to turn to Manuel Tufro, who is joining us from CELS, Centro de Estudios Legales y Sociales, the Center for Legal and Social Studies from Argentina. He's the director for the area of justice and security, and so works on issues of police violence, protests, etc. So I'll turn to you, Manu.
Thank you, Laura. Well, I'm not so fluent in English as the women in the panel, and having to compete with the biodiversity palooza is not helping. So I have to go back to my notes, so you will excuse me. I was thinking that to talk about climate action and civic space in Latin America, I think we have to address the question of what does the energy transition looks like in the most unequal region and one of the most violent regions of the world. And to no one's surprise, it looks very unjust. It's an unjust transition. It's a social and economic process that is deepening inequalities all across the region. And this is the case with Argentina too. And we are being dragged into the global reality of the energy transition in the context of a big ideological shift regarding the place and role of the state in our country. We have a far-right government since December, which is like an free market extremism and climate change denial. So the enormous amount of planning required for a just transition seems impossible nowadays in Argentina and is incompatible with these ideas that are the paramount features of the new official ideology in Argentina. So the worst scenario is being imposed to us. An extractive approach without any added value, all the advantages for the corporations, and no participation from the impacted communities. A second level of our national context has to do with the shrinking civic space in Argentina too. I will just mention a couple of big issues. Then if we have time, we can go deeper. The first thing, of course, is the crackdown on social protests that we are experimenting since last December. A second point, I will describe this like the expansion of the secrecy logic in the state that goes against participation and access to information. And then the attacks of digital far-right militias, that's how we are calling them, digital militias, and the increasing hostile environment, online environment for all kinds of activism. So we are experimenting all these phenomena in the shrinking civic space in Argentina. And in this general context, what is happening with environmental defenders and climate actions? We have two main political subjects that we can quickly consider as the first line of the environmental defenders, and these are grassroots environmental organizations and movements, what we call the asambleas ambientales, and the indigenous communities. These are the main two political subjects in the front line. Both of them have suffered repression and criminalization for years, especially at the hands of provincial governments in places like the Patagonia in the south of the countries and in Jujuy in the northwest. So this is not new for this group, but usually the national government had a sort of balancing role that not always was effective, but at least we had this resource to go to the national level. So now we have lost this. This is finished because the national and provincial governments are aligned with the goals of expanding extractive industries as fast as possible, regardless of the consequences. So fear is growing in this group, in these grassroots groups, especially in the face of decisions such as the cyber patrolling protocol, the protocol that the government has issued to monitor social networks and platforms, and the creation, I will go deep with this after, but the creation of a special police unit for intervening in social conflicts that involves critical economic sectors. So there are a couple of political tools or political devices that the government has developed that I think that are worth mentioning and worth noting. First, what is called the incentive regime for large investment is like a special regime for foreign investment. It's a legislation that grants extraordinary tax, customs, and foreign exchange benefits to companies in sectors like forestry, infrastructure, mining, energy, technology, etc., for a 30-year period. So despite of the direct impact on their territories and livelihoods, indigenous communities and rural groups and environmental defenders were excluded for any consultation and participation process regarding this regime. And in this regime, the prior consultation is being neutralized as the benefits for corporations are protected against local regulations, including environmental laws or provincial requirements for prior consultation. So the companies registered under this special regime can request exemption from local participation and consultation processes, as the regime does not mandate them, and provincial laws may be deemed inapplicable in these cases. So we are very worried that these or other kinds of incentive regimes are working as a sort of state of emergency or exceptional rule that effectively cancel or bypass human rights and environmental protection and safeguarding. And we're very interested in researching if this exists in other countries and if this is working in other countries as this kind of exceptional state too. The second tool that I think is interesting is this police unit called the Productive Security Unit. That is a police unit that is signaling the government's stance on potential social conflicts involving companies from key sector of the economy, which, according to the government, require heightened security measures in the production or transportation of goods. So the concept of productive security is like an euphemism masking the political decision to prevent any protest or conflict that could hinder the operations of extractive mining, hydrocarbon exploitation, or agribusiness. In this way, security forces that are a public resource are being deployed to serve private interests. So even in this glooming scenario, there are some cracks and fissures that we want to exploit and some alliances that need to be strengthened. First, surprisingly to us, the government is not quitting the Escazú agreement. I think that you've heard about the Escazú agreement in the INCLO discussions. At least until now, the government is not quitting the agreement. So there probably will be zero money to implement the agreement. But there was a commitment from the government in the COP meeting in Chile a couple of months ago to develop an action plan to implement the agreement. So we are part of a national NGO alliance called the Escazú Observatory in Argentina, and which is specifically focused on following these commitments. Of course, we think of Escazú as a key tool to go against decisions like this incentive regime that I was talking before, that cancel participation and consultation. So this is a space we are putting a lot of effort in. We are building a strong alliance with organizations and indigenous communities from Chile, Bolivia, and the province of Jujuy, what is called the Lithium Triangle in the northwest of the country, to document and advocate on the human rights impacts of lithium mining. So we want to support the organizative processes of these communities and encourage the experience exchange between them. These are areas with very different levels of development of the lithium mining. So the exchange is very interesting because some of them have a lot of experience dealing with the companies. Some of them are new to this. So it's very interesting, the exchange. Unbelievable, the Public Office of Indigenous Affairs in Argentina is driving a discussion on indigenous communal ownership. I think this issue maybe has come out in the INCLO conversations too. The lack of the communal ownership of the indigenous lands is a key problem in the discussion with the corporation. The government is advancing with this, although it goes against the public racist narrative that this government is developing publicly, which considers that there is only one kind of property, which is private and individual property. So we don't know if there is something more behind this project, if this is like a trap or what, but we are following this process and we are coordinating effort with different indigenous organizations to follow this project because it's a very important one. So in the meantime, we have to interact and help grassroots organizations and communities that are very frightened, as I said before, by the government threats. At the moment, it is very difficult to separate real threats from rhetorical ones, because spreading this chilling effect is, of course, clearly one of the government goals. But we expect the situation to deteriorate in the short and medium term. So the support and the continuous interaction with this group is a key task we must carry on. So I leave it here for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Manu. That was great. Things that I kind of want to take up from that, or that struck me. We all, I think, in this room know that these are the challenges that we're facing regarding the persecution of human rights defenders, climate change. All of these are long-term issues. Probably for Indigenous persons, that's the longest that they've been kind of facing it and reacting and resisting. But also how quickly a situation can change. No, in one presidency in Argentina, the challenges suddenly are incredible. So kind of both being able to respond to those very long-term challenges, and then suddenly the short ones. But also what I thought was interesting, and I think it was mentioned in a number of the other reflections from speakers, is even within a government that is not considered an ally, what are opportunities that can still exist within that, right? Still being part of the Escazú agreement, or having a judiciary that might be, you know, still willing to kind of decide with civil society. So that I think is interesting. It's not all, you know, black or white. So I think that was something that was interesting to hear there. And then once again, I think I hadn't picked on that before, but the issue of consultation being kind of reduced or set aside is something that if we don't see that as, you know, a crucial component to defend, this will kind of down the line be really, really difficult. And once again, you also started on the question of how do we see the just transitioning happening? Well, it's unjust currently, and it's deepening inequalities, and once again a challenge for us as we think of strategies both at the national level but also regional and international. So with these kind of initial presentations, I want to kind of take a moment, or give you a moment, to think of any questions that you would like to ask while I start with first one that I will kind of leave open for whoever wants to respond from the panel. And this one is one that I really like, and it comes from the perspective of INCLO. Clearly, we believe in kind of cross regional learning, and that the importance of that. But I wanted to kind of turn it to you and say, for your organization, why is it important to learn from kind of other countries, or being in spaces in another country to kind of face that? And why is that a particularly important kind of component when we're thinking about defending civic space for climate action?
Yeah, thank you. That's such an important question. And I think it links to something that's really integral in the whole kind of civil society movement and climate justice movement, of the importance of understanding how connected all of our work is. And that's at kind of a national level, as well as an international level. And I think something that in the UK has really been lacking is that kind of join up in different social justice movements, and the understanding of the intersections between climate and racism and class, and so many things that people care deeply about, but we haven't got that kind of strength of movement necessarily in the UK. And it's changing, it's coming, but that needs a lot of work. And I think when you then kind of transpose that up to the international level, I mean, just being on this panel and understanding that the parallels are just like, it's so obvious, and that's not a coincidence. And I think when it comes to something like climate justice, recognizing what the powers that be, how they are trying to stop people from pushing forward what we so desperately need so urgently. It's why INCLO and like this week and generally connecting with international colleagues is so vital. So I think just having that kind of big picture, this is not an individual country struggle, this is very much a global one, has been, yeah, invaluable.
Thank you, Lau, for that question. So my connection of that question to our context is that part of what we're doing as KHRC to be able to push back against the constricting civic space is that we have helped to nurture and incubate a platform that we call the Civic forums, Civic Freedoms Forum, the CFF. So this forum is some sort of a solidarity platform where civil societies come together, share experiences, basically draw strength and solidarity from each other. So coming to this kind of space where we're learning and hearing what's happening across, different regions of the world helps to bring these learnings to the space that we have already helped to incubate, because the issues are very much similar, the threats are similar, and many times even the responses that we need are quite similar. So for me to be able to draw lessons and take them back to a forum that is bringing the key civil society organizations in Kenya, for me, I find that quite profound. And I think that's really the essence of just being able to hear what's happening across the globe. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think it's a very good question, particularly if we see it from also the perspective of INCLO. I think, I think it's very commonly said that climate change is not it has no limits of jurisdiction. And same are these civic space issues, they are all across the jurisdictions. And more than to see them as, learning opportunities, which is there, definitely there. We can recognize global trends with different jurisdictions. But I also see them as a, place for campaign development or solidarity, as she said, in terms of when I gave you this example of Fridays for Future. So India was in a crackdown state. At time we had the right-wing government totally ruling, diminishing civic space. But at the international level, we have various civil society organizations issuing statements, contacting activists at the grassroots level, because the civic society organizations at the India level, which are already under attack, were a little hesitant to issue statements. But all other civil society organizations who are, say, in UK or America, they are not under the direct threat from Indian government. So they were issuing statement in support of the activists, young activists who were jailed. And it played a very important role. The government was under pressure, though we had to go, once a criminal case is lodged, you have to go through the criminal trial process. But it was very crucial. So similar things can happen when, when we build a solidarity network or a forum, in addition to our members with, with those who are working nationally, regionally, or internationally, to build campaigns and advocacy and solidarity in a way that that helps the movement or activists on the ground.
So I think it's pretty much covered, but of course it's unavoidable, this kind of work, because there are regional and global trends and patterns. So we have to work this way. I just want to add that we learn from other countries, but also, and this has a lot to do with INCLO, we learn about specific organizations, not just countries, organizations that have their experience, their trajectories, that work different subjects, that have their strategies. So that is very crucial to us.
Any questions from the audience that I can turn to? Yeah, we'll go 1 and 2 and then go back to the panel.
Thanks, guys, for that. Really, sorry, I'm really loud. God, thank you for that really interesting panel, all the contributions. It's interesting to see the trends that they all link up, even though obviously there's in the global north, it's actually coming that way as well with the types of policing that we're seeing. In Ireland, we're suddenly seeing in the last year a huge amount of anti-NGO, anti-civic space rhetoric coming from the far right. It seems to have come out of nowhere, but it's interesting to know that it seems to be a trend. I suppose the question that I have is about policing, and maybe directed more towards Ruth, but I'd like to hear from everyone about the chilling effect that the type of policing that we're seeing can have on pushing people away from activism. And yeah, again, example in Ireland where we've had people be arrested under abusing public order powers, and then being, not being given bail, and then the case being dropped because there is no real case, and they're released, but they'll be dissuaded from participating in the protest again. So I'd be interested to hear about experiences from your jurisdictions on that. Thank you.
Thank you all for a brilliant panel. You each work for organizations that have that play a unique role in your jurisdictions for kind of bringing together civil society and pushing for greater freedoms for civil society. Obviously, when we talk about the concept of civil society, it's a very broad concept. There's organizations working across the political spectrum on a whole range of different issues. And Snigdha, you're talking about this a little bit when you were kind of highlighting the chilling effect of Indian civil society for fear of reprisals and how the international civil society community can kind of play a role there. I wonder if you could each, or whoever wants to answer this question, kind of reflect on some of the challenges in uniting your civil society within your jurisdiction, across issue areas and across, political spectrums, and share any kind of insights into how you've managed to do that, or things that have stood in your way, and how we can work together to kind of share learnings on that issue.
I'm going to try with this one. It wasn't working a little bit. That way we have a roaming mic for participants if you have any questions. Those are two great questions. I was kind of thinking in that similar direction. So turning to our speakers, when we're talking about chilling effect and how that can impact or push people away from activism, I'd want to kind of add to that and say, what are the ways that are less obvious of chilling effect, right? So someone being arrested or surveilled might have that, but within that, beyond that, are there things that we might not even know about as much or don't get as much attention? And then once again, the question about kind of the definition of civil society can be very broad. So who are your traditional stakeholders, the ones that maybe are untraditional? And so once again, that question from Jack regarding how do you work across issue areas, political areas, where are the challenges and where are the opportunities, I think will be great. And I'll turn it to whoever wants to answer in that direction.
Thank you so much. I think both of them are very great questions. So I'll first answer the first question with regard to chilling effects and how it impacts the activists, the defenders, and the movement at large, and also sometimes civil society organizations. See, particularly with regard to young people, when we see the chilling effect on them, it is quite serious and grave because, their careers are at stake. They are either school students, they are either in colleges, and they are, doing this extra activities. And particularly when a case is filed against them, they face issues with regard to employment. They face issues with regard to passports. For example, for Disha Ravi's case, which is the Fridays for Future Activists in India, she had to, go to the High Court, institute another case, and then get her passport because after this whole incident, she was facing many sanctions by the government. So and when one young person is seeing the impact of their participation in an action space, the other civil person, the other young person may have some, reservations with regard to how much they want to get involved with such movements. So particularly with the youth, I think it is very grave, very serious. And even when we have activists and defenders who have been working in the area for 20, 30 years, even when they stand in support, many a times we have seen that young people are not coming to protest or actions and they are taking a step back. But however, they are coming more for activities like cleanup drives, because they are more non-political activities, but less for climate-related actions. And if I see chilling effect, particularly on the defenders, so those who have been working in the area for quite long, they're very resolute, some are very resolute and some break. So it's like very human tendency, like humans are different. So I know human rights defenders and we have worked with her with HRLN from Chhattisgarh, and she was gang raped by the police officers. She was working for the rights of indigenous people, and they have rich minerals in their forest. and the government wanted to push for the mining industry to go inside their forest. And she was the leader back then, only women. She was a teacher, a government teacher, public school teacher, and she turned into an activist. And she faced and when I say by the police, so the state is involved, and now she's also working for protecting other indigenous young girls there. And I have seen her work over the years in spite of the chilling effect, and she's making them resolute. So we have inspiring in stories also, where people have no option but to fight, because then the chilling effect cannot come to you, because you have no option. You have to fight. It is a direct attack on you, on your liberties and your right to life. So there are those examples also. With regard to civil society organization, I'll quickly wind it up. It's very challenging. Why? Because we get registered with the legislation which is with the state. So if the civil society organizations under the legislation is registered with the state, they have the power to cancel that registration, start inquiries, send you income tax notices when there's nothing against you, anything they can, bring to you. So civil society organizations now in India are trying to stay away from very controversial, spaces or issues. There, when I answer your second question, there comes the role of the civil society organizations who are working in regional or international jurisdiction, because you cannot face those actions on you because you are not part of that jurisdiction. So your solidarity, public solidarity, is very important. And one thing that we, very strongly practice when we work with civil society organization and activists, that we don't leave the civic space that we have. If we are leaving the civic space that we have, they will totally take it away. So we believe, so even when they are coming behind the young people, the intelligence, asking them questions, those kind of chilling effects before the criminalization, we still will go and do some action, maybe with less number of people, but we will not leave the civic space. Or maybe we plan some action, as you were saying, or I think you were saying, which is more related to them, maybe not for climate justice, maybe something which is more relevant to them, and where we can get a large mass gathering of thousands of people. So that's why our civic space should be there, and it doesn't go to them, and that is what they want. Yeah, I answered. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try and make it very quick. For us, the chilling effects as we have experienced them. One is obviously regime policing. Regime policing being the police who are working really to safeguard the interests of the regime and not the interests of the people. So, for example, during the widely publicized demonstrations that were led by the young people, popularly the Gen Zs, we had an effect that we had not seen in a long time. The planting or infiltration by police into demonstrations, and they would come in, undercover, plain clothes. And so you sit in a demo thinking that the person chanting the loudest next to you is a protester like you, but they are an undercover policeman. So before you know it, you're hounded into a waiting van, many times never to be seen. We had also an instance where 3 young people who were quite vocal on the issue of, the regime, how excesses, basically. These people were abducted. They were away from family for more than 1 month. Nobody knew where they were. And eventually, when they were released, because there was a lot of uproar from civil society, they came looking extremely frail and weak. And they said they were held in dark places where there was no food, no water, and they were only allowed a small amount of light in a day. So basically, to terrify them, they were tortured. And so when you see this kind of things happening, even when you have the strongest will to keep fighting for climate justice, for human rights, it has a chilling effect on you and how much you can really go on. We've had women who are at the forefront of pushing for, for democracy, recently being raped in the full glare of their children. One woman who had been resisting the issue of carbon markets and the takeover of their land, and because of all the issues it has to do with, the climate effects and all that, was stripped naked in the full glare of her son and made to walk naked in broad daylight in a village. So you can imagine what that does to you and the people, living around you. So for us, it has really taken a different turn. We had this kind of dictatorial tendencies many years ago during the regime of the second president, but we are seeing history repeating itself in a very alarming manner. So the chilling effects are real, and they can actually keep off people. The Gen Zs, for example, in our case, had a strong resolve to keep going on the streets. But once the killings became too much, they had to retreat. And what was even more chilling was that after the demonstrations, quelled or went quiet, we started discovering bodies of young people, and most of them were women. They were discovered, obviously killed, and you could see they were tortured, discovered in some sort of garbage heap. And then the government planted a man and said, this man must have been raping and killing. But because it came soon after the protests and the demonstrations, everybody thinks the government has a hand in the killings. So as KHRC, we're actually investigating to know who are these people and how did they meet their deaths. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Yeah, both excellent questions. I'll take the question about civil society first. So I think this is like the key question for lots of civil society organizations. That clearly different groups have different approaches to how change happens. You've got organizations who think that lobbying politicians is the most effective way of making change. You've got groups that think that it's direct action or bust. There's just no way that you can engage with parliamentarians in this context. You've got people who just want to use the law, and there is often a tension between those groups. And I think the role that certainly Liberty tries to take in the UK is that we need to facilitate the spaces to name those tensions and talk about them, because the fact is we all need to be doing what we're doing in order to create change. It just won't work. You can't just do it by parliamentary lobbying. You can't just do it by direct action. We're part of a bigger movement ecosystem, and those conversations are difficult and painful, and can surface lots of power imbalances, which also need to be addressed. And for organizations like Liberty, which relatively well resourced compared to grassroots groups, we have a role in lending our resource, be that capacity building, be it financial support, be it providing some cover so that other organizations, grassroots groups can go and do some kind of wild direct action that we wouldn't do, but we can make sure that they've got the best legal advice when it happens. So I think it's a really important question. I think we have to make space for everyone in the movement. And then just a note on the chilling effect in the UK. We talk about the chilling effect a lot, and we have, like most police forces, I think it's fair to say, violent, racist policing across the globe, including in the UK. But I also we throw it out there a lot. And in the past year, we've seen, particularly in the first 6 months since October, we saw hundreds of thousands of people taking to the street for Palestinian solidarity in London. And we talk about the chilling effect, but I also think we need to acknowledge in the UK that people are still coming out. And yes, we have these laws which make it much harder and make it much riskier. And there's a lot of kind of vagueness in how those can be applied to marches like the Palestine solidarity marches, but people are still turning up. And I think that's something that we need to desperately hold on to and celebrate. So just, yeah, it's nice to think about the fact that still exists, that strength of feeling still exists.
Just a couple of things on the chilling effect. So in Argentina, chilling effect is an explicit political goal of the current government. Maybe I am being too optimistic, but I think this paradoxically can undermine the chilling effect. the fact that it is an explicit political goal. It happened before in Argentina, that when the governments start targeting social protests go to the street. We have to see what happens. At the moment, of course, chilling effect is part of the conversation since December. I think it's impacting more on small groups. Big demonstrations have worked like a sort of a protection, but smaller or more isolated groups are especially worried and thinking twice before going to the streets. This is happening now. And then there's a particular situation that we now can see at some extent, and it is how older activists seem to be more frightened than younger ones in Argentina. They compare the situation in the streets with the military government, for example. They have the experience of the military government, and they do these comparisons. Of course, there is a knowledge gap on how to act in the face of police repression, because we had a couple of decades of reasonable freedom levels in terms of right to protest. So now older activists seem to have a valuable knowledge, but I think that in transmitting this knowledge, they could be strengthening the chilling effect too. So we have to be very careful on how we transmit this knowledge. As I think that this is something that must be done, but we have to be very careful on how we do this.
Any other questions from the audience? Yeah.
Thank you for your excellent presentations. In spite of the music, it was really fantastic. Mine is a question for all and a reflection that troubles me a lot, and I think all that we are here is that this tendency of restricting the civic space is very general, but also it's very popular. When we see it's implemented by governments that have a large democratic support. We can like it or not, but it tends to be that way. And when you speak to people in general, they tend to support it. So I think that we are losing this battle thoroughly. So my question is, what can explain the popularity of restricting civic space? Because it seems a little counterintuitive that in a democracy, it's becoming very popular to restrict democratic liberties. So, because I guess that if we don't find an answer to that, it's going to be quite difficult to face this challenge.
No, thank you so much for the excellent panel with live music. Huh? Okay, yeah. So now, related to this question, you know, like, I think that on the one hand, it's very important to protect those that are taking action for advancing climate and environmental goals. But on the other hand, when you are thinking on protecting freedom of speech, you also have the other side of the coin, that is, for instance, that freedom of speech can be used for spreading misinformation and for also, yeah, like doing some things that we actually don't want to see out there because they are harmful for doing the right thing in terms of advancing climate action. So I wanted to ask you if you have any ideas in terms of like that balance between what action civil society can take to advance in both activities. On the one hand, protecting those that need to be protected, but also being aware that some uses of freedom of speech need to be, if not restricted, at least combat against, you know, like, because they are harmful for the kind of action that we need to take on climate and environmental matters.
Hi, I'm Inam from Bangladesh. Wonderful talk. It's a difficult one, actually. I'll give you an example. So when we work with communities impacted by floods, and we try to implement an early warning system, and communities would say, like, I'm not getting this, I'm not seeing this as useful every day, unless like sometimes in the year when there's flood, which means the remaining time they can forget that utility. Civil society organizations also could be like that. So if we are talking about just one agenda, like climate, biodiversity, like, or some of the organizations care about a few of the agenda, but for people, it's about daily life, like everything that they go through. In our case, we have seen that, like civil society organizations who have been suffering from civic space issues, including murders and forced disappearances, people did not come out in the street for them. But we did have a revolution afterwards. When it became about like everyday life, the dictator is gone, essentially. Now we are having the space to try everybody, all the incidences that are happening. So the question is, like, in the process of opening the civic space, how do we make sure that we work on everything while connected with, of course, the issues that we care about? And there is a second part there, which is about solidarity with everybody. And that could test us. It's like Hamas becoming a like tool of testing you, like to what extent do you show solidarity to Palestinians, and then questioning your ethics because of the murders and everything. So it could get complicated like that if we work on everything and with everybody. So how would you resolve that? And because essentially it's a fight for everyone.
Quick question. So, Diana Guzman, de Justicia. Thank you for your wonderful presentations. It was very interesting, very sad, but also very interesting to see like the commonalities among different cases. And so precisely because of these commonalities, I was wondering, we already know that the shrinking of civil spaces, it's like a general trend in our countries, in different societies with different characteristics. But I was wondering whether there's something special about the climate action that related to this shrinking of the civil space. Is there something about it that it's different from other examples of shrinking of civil spaces or not? For example, we know that denialism is a significant part of the narratives related to climate action, but at the same time, I'm not sure if there are other things that are particularly of this type of shrinking of civic spaces. So I would like to know a little bit about your reflections about it.
One last one, and I think we'll have enough time to cover all of them.
Thank you. Thank you all for your presentations. I'm Guillermo Torres from Mexico, and I just wanted to ask very quickly if you could share some of your thoughts around or experience, as well as with regards to how corporations are involved in this phenomenon of shrinking of civic space, because we know that in many of our countries, especially with relation to the environmental impacts of corporate activities, of course, there are responsibilities that are directly linked to state actors. But I'm curious about how do you envision or assess the role of corporations in this phenomenon? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's an excellent question. So I'm glad we had it. I'm just going to repeat the questions as I hopefully understood them to help our panelists. So we had a first question of why is it popular to restrict civic space? How do you understand that challenge? What happens, and I'm rewording a little bit your question, Sergio, but what happens when anti-rights actors are using tools that we consider part of civic space, whether it's free expression or protests, for goals that frankly go against kind of the agendas we're pushing for? What is special about climate action when dealing with the issue of shrinking civic space? Thoughts and experiences on how corporations, their role of corporations and the phenomenon of shrinking civic space. And then there was a question about, how do you deal with all the many issues that come within human rights violations in the space of civic space, shared with kind of the recent Bangladesh experience, and whether there international instances that kind of put to test our human rights institutions. And I think what we're seeing in terms of the genocide happening in Palestine certainly has put, a lot of attention on kind of certain weaknesses in the human rights system, but I don't think they're necessarily complicated when the human rights lens is the most important one. And the first part is human rights lives that are being ended there. So with that, we have 5 excellent questions and 4 excellent speakers. So I'll turn it to you.
Thank you. Oh my God, that's very hard. Thank you so much. There are so many questions in 5 minutes. I'm going to do my best. Okay, yeah. I'm going to start with a question about what to do about the fact that some of these rights are universal and the people we disagree with have the right to express themselves, because I think it's such an important thing that we have to address, particularly when you work in the kind of civil liberties space, is that we do believe in freedom of expression, and we do believe that we know that people have views that we disagree with, and we also kind of think they have the right to express them within certain bounds, right? And I think something that we grapple with a lot at Liberty in the UK is legislation that restricts hate speech, and that's not because we think that, it's not just that people have the right to say things even if they're offensive, which obviously can be true, but it's also because when you see the policing of language and thought, that is often then used against marginalized communities in a way that, because communities of color in the UK are over policed, those laws end up being used against them. And we've seen that a lot in the past year, where protesters, including Palestine protesters, have been arrested and charged and taken to court for holding a placard that was making a comment about the Secretary of the Home Secretary in the UK at the time, and using kind of this talk about hate speech. So I think we have to be so careful when we start restricting people's freedom of expression, because ultimately it ends up being used against people who actually don't have the, who are more likely to be marginalized by state actors in the UK. I also just wanted to talk quickly about, there are so many good questions, to the question about corporations. So I think we can definitely see in the UK that while corporations might seem quite far from the conversation about restricting protest rights, they are definitely there, and they are definitely feeding into the policing of specific actions. A few months ago, Greenpeace UK staged an action outside some Unilever offices, which was a kind of a bog standard Greenpeace action. They scaled the wall, they did a banner, they had some activists lie down outside, and 28 of them were arrested and charged with public order offences. That wouldn't have happened. That just would never have happened 5-10 years ago in the UK. And those corporations are obviously very, very silent. And I think that links to, I'm going to tangentially try and link it to the question on how do we work on everything? And I think the answer is we can't work on everything. We won't be able to do it effectively if we're spread over every single issue. What we need to do is recognize the join up between organizations, and also recognize where your strengths lie. So at Liberty, we know that by talking about civil liberties, we're able to engage people who are kind of our natural allies and who are really present in the civic space, but also people who who probably really disagree with a lot of what we do. And when it's come to things like restricting protest rights, actually, we've got libertarians in the Conservative Party who are coming out to bat for us, because they're like, no, freedom of speech matters, freedom of expression matters, even though we really disagree with what you're saying. And I think that's a really interesting link, because you have to kind of recognize what your strength is, and we wouldn't be able to do that if we were kind of taking a much more broad stroke approach. Anyway, I'll stop talking now.
All right, I will take a few questions, and I will start with a question on why it's popular to restrict civic space. That's a big question, and by no means not an easy one. My immediate reflections are that I think the biggest tool for any civil society including human rights defenders, environmental human rights defenders, is obviously an open and democratic space. That space to be able to organize, a space that is, free for you to, express yourself as a civil society, the space that allows the right to protest to be able to thrive, democratic and open digital spaces. That's the only space that civil society can thrive. And therefore constricting that space, limiting it, is basically curtailing the operations of, human rights defenders, civil society organizations, environmental human rights defenders. And I think ultimately it is the reason why it is the most popular way of trying to curtail civil society organizations. And why do we, and how are corporations involved in the shrinking of civic space? From our side of, geography, we have seen the police, and that's why I went to the question of regime policing, because we have seen corporations conniving a lot with the police. There are so many elements of corporate capture that are, perpetuating the constricting of space, especially by by corporations. The fact that, corporations will be able to capture certain public institutions, certain agencies within operations of the state, that particular way of operating diminishes the ability of communities, civil societies to be able to demand for, for better. So for example, we have seen the corporations mobilizing political elite. In our case, we have seen where communities try to come up in protest against corporations that are pitching up development projects without paying due regard to community rights. And we have seen politicians coming up openly in support of corporations because of aspects of corporate capture. So I see that as being the way it plays out. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I think I'll start with your question, and I think it is a very good question, but I'm not that disappointed. I'm a little hopeful. I understand that governments or democracies who are practicing, working very actively towards diminishing civic space and are sort of far right or right, are very popular. But what I see, what are they popular on? They're popular mostly on the communal agenda, on the religious agenda. But when it is about their work on ground, even those who are on their parties, particularly in the Indian case, they are extremely fed up of them because they don't have jobs. They don't have, in many cultures, they don't have food security. Somewhere they have water issues. So the basics of the human life, even a populist government is not able to answer. They are just working on propaganda so far in the context of India. So they are currently very popular, but their feet are not on the ground. So, they may fall anytime. This is how we want to see it. With regard to, your question on how CSOs can develop popularity, I would say that, this is a difficult time, undoubtedly. And we know when the politics or the democracies or the governments, they change, we see better days also. So it is very political when it is about civic space rights. But how I see civil society organizations can be very constant with their popularity is particularly when we listen to the community, what they want, or the local people at large. I may have a climate agenda, but that does not resonate with the people where I'm living. They have other challenges. They have challenges with regard to roads not being accessible to them. They don't have medical facilities in remote hilly districts of my state. So they want roads irrespective of few trees being, cut down. So I cannot come forward with my agenda. No, you cannot cut down that tree. So we need to, as civil society organizations, we need to understand maybe in the local way what community wants and, practice civic space there also. So, we have that constant popularity. Sometimes what we are seeing in India that civil society organizations, are also started working from top to bottom, wherein they get money from funders for some project, and they want that project to, to be done in a particular area when the people do not want to do it. So I think that is where the civil society organization should not lose it, because then we will lose the support from the community, and we work with community. So this is my reaction and answer to your question. I'll very briefly answer other questions with regard to misinformation, and I think we discussed it with Sergio in earlier discussions with INCLO also. I think it is very important for us to develop some, mechanism in whichever level we are working, international, regional, or at the national level. For example, whatever work we are doing, if I'm doing a litigation case, I make sure that I issue a public statement, a public release about it, a newspaper, a media release for that on the newspaper. I distribute the resource to the young persons, young civil society organization related persons, so that they can put a post about it on their social media accounts. So I am in some ways, in a very smaller way, not as big as the mechanism of misinformation is there, but creating or putting that positive information or correct information on the system, either through newspapers or through social media. And social media currently in India, particularly Instagram, is a place where you can, find everything, news and campaigns and everything. So we are trying to slowly adopt that. Whatever we are practicing, we publicize it. We don't limit that information to ourselves. So in that way, we are not fighting that you tweeted this wrong thing on my tweet, but we are parallelly, we are putting our correct information. So that will have an impact, and we are seeing that has an impact. And yeah, for the third, I will not. So with regard to Dinah's question, for us, the difference between climate action in relation to civic space and human rights action is, in India, the climate actions or climate justice movement are seen more as, actions of the Western society, which is seeping in through India, though we already have our own climate related issues, environmental issues, but they will see it as something, someone is funding them to do this action, to do this litigation, to do this campaign, so that the development of India can be hampered, So because, the government is very highly so that is the difference between human rights movement, the climate justice movement. They are totally seen as the movements or campaigns of the foreign agents there. So this is the difference that I can see. And I'll take half a minute to answer the cooperation question. I think, so we are seeing that corporations are working hand in gloves with the government or the police administration or the district administration, particularly in the just transition, which is we say is unjust transition. In cases of hydropower project, when at the level of the public hearings, when the public at large is not understanding the project, they are asking for the documents in their own language and they're protesting. So they will, both the corporation and government, they will stand together and they will have some action, police action on the people protesting. And after the project has received clearances, and for example, I shared this case yesterday wherein, 204 people died. So after, when they died and they protested, then again corporations and, government, they came together and they just they started police actions on them. They said that no actions. So they work hand in gloves in India, and which is worrisome. Just one remark to what you have said. I think I totally understand and it has already been answered. But what we need to be cautious about, that I see a rise of far-right movement in the civic space. For example, in India, cow vigilantes, they will take out a rally for cows, and stuff like that. So we need to be very cautious, and they are getting the civic space. The right-based actions are not getting the civic space, but the propaganda of the far right and their campaigns, they are getting the civic space, and the police will walk with them like they're protecting them. So we need to answer that. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, sorry, I just retained the first question, so we address that. The question about why are popular some policies that restrict some aspect of civic space. I think that maybe think as of a global trend, but it probably has like local answers to that question. For example, in Argentina, I think that this question could be addressed like the question on how social protest went from popular to unpopular. I think that the first thing is that I think that probably there was an abuse of some direct action tactics like roadblocks in the last few years. I think this is a conversation that social movements should engage in because we have to know how do we speak to a broader part of society or how we realize at what point they are not anymore sharing or even understanding our fights. So I think that that is an important conversation to have. But this situation allowed a very long and intense political and media campaign that linked protest with a variety of offenses or crimes and depicted protesters as people that don't work, that are lazy, so they have time to go to demonstrations. This has been happening for at least 20 years. It's very intense. And I think this is now common sense. This depiction of people who protest as lazy people who don't work and so they can go to demonstration. This is common sense, a very broad common sense. So I think this was possible because there was a successful strategy to isolate protest as something that is relevant only to a small part of society. And the rest of the society is held hostage by this small group of demonstrators. So protesters are not part of an us, but they are like a they, no, like a them. So this was a very successful strategy. Of course, political and economic crisis could change this, because if many people think that they have to go to the street, this will change. But at the moment, this is still the common sense, and this is still the hegemonic view. And so this is why these policies of especially the crackdown on social protest is possible. Some years ago, it was not possible at all.
All right. So I think I'm going to have one reflective question for everyone here, and then we can close, and whoever wants to join the party next door can. So we are here at COP16 in Cali, because I think everyone here believes that climate and environmental justice is a human rights issue, and vice versa, human rights is so on. And so I want to ask, if there's one thing that you'd want to say or ask or engage climate activists and environmental activists, what would it be? What would be your ask, your challenge, your invitation from your organization or your perspective as human rights actors? 1 minute.
No, I think that the challenge is to strengthen more the ties between the human rights movement and climate movement. I think that when we go to the grassroots level, this distinction does not exist. There's no such thing as climate activists, climate defenders. They are like communities, indigenous people. They have these different resources on how to call themselves. They could be human rights defenders, they could be environmental defenders. So they understand better how we have to intersect these fights. I think that this is more of a challenge for what we in Argentina at least think as the NGO level. The NGO, the organizations that have maybe more specific agendas. So I think that's where we have to focus on how we build stronger ties between the human rights and the climate action.
Wow, it has become louder. So yeah, see, particularly with regard to the activist, I'll answer that. My ask to the climate activists would definitely be, I know we have seen a trend from past COPs till now that we are talking about human rights issues, but I think it is not enough. When we go for negotiations in the climate COPs, there, of course, we are talking about human rights issues, but then I recall our discussion with Felipe, and how many of those instruments have human rights written on them. So we still are lacking on human rights indicators, and those climate activists who are very actively working on the climate agenda needs to push those human rights indicator more. So I think that is my very big ask from the climate activists.
I'll keep it short so you can join the party. And my reflection is really, we have seen the effects of climate change, climate emergencies, and and weather events that have been quite unprecedented. I think now environmental justice, climate justice issues are more urgent than ever before. And I think we need to really synergize our efforts. There is need for more collaboration. It's not enough to speak about these things in the global north and not, collaborate. It is for us to pull together because the effects are the same. The responses are more or less the same. And so there's more power in just pulling together. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Can I even think? I'm not sure. Very similar to what's been said. So I think in terms of speaking to the climate movement, yes, we need to humanize stories, particularly in countries like the UK, where although we are feeling the impacts of climate change, it's in no way the same as in so many countries in the global south. Making people realize that it's here and it is going to affect the things they really care about now very soon. But I would also say to the human rights movement that we're quite late to the conversation. And I think it's easy for us to talk about what the climate movement needs to do, but for us as well, we need to reframe how we've been talking about issues for a long time. And lots of us have been working in environmental justice, but we haven't been calling it environmental justice. And that is our responsibility, is to own that and make sure that actually we're supporting the movement as much as we want them to kind of support us as well.
So before we give a very well-deserved applause to our panelists, I'd like to once again, to everyone who's had attention, so hold on there, just to say that each one of these issues are clearly issues that we could spend hours on. What I hope that I can invite you to is to explore and visit the work of the organizations that are represented here. So Liberty from the UK, KHRC from Kenya, HRLN from India, and CELS from Argentina. I'm representing INCLO, a network with other members as well. And once again, De Justicia, who is our host here and is our member in Colombia. So please engage with us, learn from that. And other than that, thank you very much to this panelists that I can talk in a concert, in a party, wherever I would take all of you to do it. And thank you for the wonderful audience.
Yeah. Okay, I just want to say a slogan and you repeat after me. I'll say no climate justice. You say without human rights. Okay. No climate justice without human rights. No climate justice. No climate justice